Today, I'm going to be talking about Guava Island, which is a film that was released in 2019 and directed by Hiro Murai. And I've been thinking about this one for a while. I originally thought I didn't have anything to say about it, but I found myself thinking about it a lot, so here we are. But I think Guava Island is a really special little film, and I think a lot of people missed it, or skipped it, or didn't know about it, or whatever. But that's unfortunate because I really do think that there are a few things worth talking about with Guava Island. So I'm going to talk about it. It makes sense to talk about it. But as always, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. So let me quickly describe the film. So sometimes I'll describe a film in my own words, and sometimes I'll use the official description. This time I'm going to use the official description because it's kind of good enough. So here it is. On Guava Island, a local musician is determined to throw a festival for everyone to enjoy. A tropical thriller starring Donald Glover and Rihanna. That is nice and short and sweet, and it describes the film pretty well. But don't get it twisted. Guava Island is about a lot more than just that. It's a naturalistic, even slice-of-life style story about a musician named Denny and the people of Guava Island, who are essentially standing up for themselves against a capitalist oppressor. That's kind of what it's all about. But anyway, going back to what I was saying before, I think that Guava Island is a really special little film, and I was actually really surprised by it. I thought it was just going to be a vanity project for Donald Glover's new music, but it really isn't. It just sorta seems like a story that someone really wanted to tell, and the cast and crew told the story using the resources and skills they were comfortable with. It's really interesting, and even for that alone, the story and the way it's told, it's worth talking about. But there's actually so much more to it, so much more that is hidden just below the surface. And I want to talk a little bit about that stuff in particular. So I'm going to talk about two of those things that are hidden just below the surface. I'm going to talk about rhythm and gravity in relation to the film. So this will be a little bit of explanation, but mostly just a recommendation for the film based on some interesting things that it does. So I'll start with rhythm. This is a familiar concept, especially if we're talking about music. And this film has music in it, but I'm actually not going to talk about music here. I'm going to talk about rhythm in the sense of narrative rhythm and visual rhythm, all right? So Guava Island is weird. The narrative follows that arc that I mentioned before about a musician and the people of Guava Island fighting back against a capitalist oppressor, right? But the weird thing is, it doesn't feel like a traditional story arc. Instead of, well, arcing, the narrative seems to beat, almost like a beating heart. But it has a weird rhythm to it. It's like a weird beating heart. And I mean that in the most complimentary way. This story, with a traditional story arc, would have been a bit thin. But the weird rhythm more than makes up for it, I think. And I just feel like it's cool to see a narrative follow a rhythm instead of an arc. And it's just cool to see something different. And I realize I'm being vague here, but I sort of have to be vague so that I don't accidentally spoil something that I don't want to spoil. So, yeah. But anyways, back to what I was saying. This rhythm that I'm describing also carries over to the visuals. Like, I think that the film is shot very well. With the cinematography and the editing and all the visuals, it's all very impressive. But it all also follows that weird rhythm, like that weird beating heart idea again. It's represented visually in changes to the color palette, scene length, and shot variety, among other things. It's a really interesting way to treat the visuals of a film, which is something we usually take for granted. And I just feel like it's cool to see visuals that follow a rhythm, even if it is a weird rhythm. And like I said before, it's just cool to see something different. So now I'll move on to gravity, another familiar concept. It is a universal force that we are all familiar with, but I'm actually not going to talk about gravity as in the force that keeps us on the ground. I'm going to talk about gravity in a slightly less literal sense, but this is actually pretty simple. So, Guava Island, well, where do I start? Certain stories are just interesting. There is some intangible feeling to these certain stories where we feel the need to just see what happens. I would say that those stories have gravity, right? They pull us in and they draw our attention. And Guava Island has that. Like I mentioned with rhythm, Guava Island is very weird. It has a weird feeling to it, but it's something that as you're watching it, you feel like you have to see it through to the end. Like you have to see what happens because you know the film has something to say. I'm not going to talk about what specifically because I don't want to spoil it, but it's a story with pretty intense gravity. You'll just have to take my word on that, though, but it's very cool. But then, the other side of that is the actual performances in the film. These performances also have a certain sense of gravity. Again, in that sense of a force that pulls us in and draws our attention. And Donald Glover and Rihanna in particular have pretty intense gravities. When they're on screen, the eye is just drawn to them more than it's drawn to anyone else. So their stories and their lives feel like the center of the universe. They're in a position to have our full and undivided attention, and they use that position to say something substantial. And again, I can't really talk too much about this without spoiling anything, but the performances have a real sense of gravity to them. Again, you'll just have to take my word on that, but it's really impressive. Trust me. So those are the two things I wanted to talk about. And of course, those are just two of the many interesting ideas or concepts that this film plays with and explores. There are definitely many more interesting ideas and concepts explored in this film, definitely. But it doesn't really make sense for me to talk about every single thing that I liked about the film. Because, well, Guava Island goes places and does things that I can't talk about without giving too much away. That's why I'm being sort of vague, and that's why I'm not really describing anything in detail. Like, there are a few other things that I would love to talk about, sure, but they would need narrative explanation in a way that would have me directly referencing plot points. And I just don't want to do that. I don't want to spoil the experience for other people, and I don't want to make it seem simpler than it is. Because even though Guava Island is only around 55 minutes long, it's incredibly dense and absolutely packed with things to think about and things to talk about. So why spoil it or why simplify it when I can just recommend it, right? So, I think that's it. I don't really have anything more to say. So, in conclusion, I think Guava Island is a really special little film. It's exciting and it's interesting and it's weird and it explores some interesting concepts and ideas. I like that the film has a sense of gravity and something to say about the world, and I like that the film has something to say about the form and rhythm of film and storytelling. I also like that the film has a surprising amount of depth and density to it, especially given that it's under an hour long. And last thing I want to say here, I think that the entire cast and crew deserve sort of a round of applause for just making a film like this. And yeah, so as you can probably tell, I think Guava Island is a really special film. I really believe that. And for what it's worth, I really can't recommend it enough.